So good morning, everyone. I guess good afternoon since it's afternoon here, but it's morning somewhere. That always feels like morning. It feels like church is morning time, so morning it is. So today, we were actually going to talk about relationships. What's a good relationship? What's a bad relationship? How should you get into them? What your goals be? We're going to move that to next week because we had the most wonderful and enlightening experience on Friday at a comedy show. And this was a future service anyway. And so we're going to shift and we're going to talk today about responsibility, ownership, and civil discourse. And we're going to use the comedy example to kind of examine some of the pieces of why those things are important. So a couple of things I want to recap first from some previous services. One that I think we talked about last time is that people generally have good intentions, right? People generally are trying to do what they would consider to be the right thing through their moral framework or their ethical framework. Ideally, the more thought you put into it, the more consistent you can be with being good and trying to do the right thing. And I was thinking about how I don't like to use the word belief or faith. And I realized that there are a couple of things that I do actually believe in, so things that I cannot objectively prove, but I make the assumption that it's true for functional reasons. So the only thing we can know, each of us individually, is that I exist, right? I think, therefore I am. And therefore I don't know if anybody else exists, but I make the assumption, right? I put them on equal footing with me, make them seem as though, okay, you're a real person, I'm a real person, because if not, then you can kind of get away with doing whatever you want because you don't know if somebody else is real, right? So there are a lack of consequences to that. And then also this belief that other people are fundamentally good. I think we do have some evidence for that. I think studies have shown and our engagements with people and discussing with people why they make decisions have shown us that people generally do try and do the right thing according to their framework. Their framework might be confused or inconsistent, but generally they're trying to do the right thing. We're also flawed, so we make emotional decisions and we aren't always even entirely consistent with our own set of beliefs. But that's a belief that I have. And the reason I have that belief, honestly, whether or not it is objectively true in a given situation, is because I think it provides for a better outcome. Because if I go around doubting everyone all of the time, then I'm constantly on a defensive stance and I cannot engage fully with people to have the kinds of conversations, build the kinds of relationship, and really build the sense of community that we need to survive as social animals. So therefore, there are a couple of things that I do believe, and that's one of them. That people are fundamentally good, and I'm going to engage with them in that way. And so I think that's an important framework to consider as we go through this topic of responsibility, or these topics of responsibility, ownership, and civil discourse as part of that. Recap over. First thing I want to talk about is responsibility. I think a lot of times we like to use the word responsibility for asking who's responsible for this, who is to blame for a given situation, topic, whatever it happens to be. I had a behavioral science teacher a long time ago in psychology, Carrie Granger is her name, and she brought up this idea of kind of the root words of responsibility, response and ability. So in a given situation, are you able to respond to it to mitigate or change the outcome? Right? So if we're in a situation, are we able to respond? Can we do something to contribute? And when you think about the situations that you personally are in on a given day, the answer is usually yes. One of my favorite ways that she articulated this is in relationships. So a lot of times we think that we have half the responsibility because we can, consist of half of the relationship. She didn't think that was true. She thought what's actually true is that both parties are 100% responsible for the relationship. And when you go back to last week's service when we talked about conflict communication, if you're considering what the other side might be thinking, how they might perceive something, if you're trying to understand your audience, that's being 100% responsible. Because it's not just about you, what you think is right and good and your intent, it also considers what the other person says or thinks or is going to receive from you. So we can be 100% responsible. And that may seem extremely exhausting to us, that we're 100% responsible for everything all the time. And it's not that we can always change everything, but there are things that we can do. And so some of those things are just really small, right? So when we look at our framework for the church, individual, community, humanity, right? We start with ourselves. So setting the example is one thing that we can always do to be responsible, to respond in a situation, to demonstrate the behavior we want others to emulate. So that's one easy way to do it. We don't always have to be getting up in people's grills and trying to fix everybody, quote unquote, right? Setting the example is sometimes enough. And that's what really sets our culture and our precedent, right? It's not that we've written down somewhere what all the cultural bits of our society are. People just know them because they see other people do them. You grow up and mimic the people around you. And so if you think something should change or be different, be that difference, live that difference. Engage in ways that you want to see others engage, right? It goes back to the golden rule. Very simple. Treat others as you want to be treated. And act to others as you want them to act to you. So, a lot of times people would say, or sometimes people might make the argument that, well, if you're doing what would basically be considered a deviant behavior, something that everyone else isn't doing, you might put yourself at a loss, right? You might stick out. You might, let's say that you want to be fair in an interaction, and you know that someone is disadvantaging themselves because they don't understand something. And you're in a situation where maybe financially you're plenty well off, and you don't, like, it's going to make you feel bad to take advantage of them. And someone will say, yeah, but that's their fault because, you know, they should have known better. And so that's free money for you. So that's good, right? Well, if you're saying that more money is more good, that's a value set that somebody might hold. But if you want to demonstrate that culture, then maybe that's not what you want to do. And so in the short term, yes, that might be a finite loss. You might lose out on a percentage of a sale that you could have gotten away with scraping out of the hands of someone who's less well off than you. But it's an infinite game loss, right? So we've talked a little bit before about finite and infinite games. Finite games have defined rules. They end very clearly at, let's say, in the end of a transaction, I won more money. I won this finite game. But the infinite game is life. And not necessarily an individual's life, right? We all die at some point. But the infinite game of humanity. So in the infinite game of humanity, setting the example is a win because it allows everybody to keep playing and keep playing in a better way. That's how you win infinite games. The number one rule of infinite games is that you keep the game going. And so the more and better we can do that, the better off we're going to be. So setting culture, even if you're going to stand out and you have to deal with a little bit of hardship, is an overall win. And as long as we can accept that hardship or accept that finite loss, then we still win because we're not really that disadvantaged in the long term. So a little bit on responsibility. It's a framework that I'd like to consider for myself because it helps me from being intellectually lazy or lazy in a way in terms of my moral or ethical courage. If I see a situation and I feel that I could do something, I feel compelled to do that because of this concept of responsibility. I am able to respond. I can do this. I am responsible for this. And what that does is it helps to combat, excuse me, I'm spitting everywhere, is to combat the bystander effect, right? So the bystander effect, psychological principle where if there are enough people around, it is more likely that no one will do anything, right? If someone falls and there's nobody else around and it's just you, you are much more likely to go help that person than if someone falls and there's a group of 20. Because our brains are socially wired, right? So we take cues. We look at what other people are doing. Well, no one else thinks that's an issue. So is it an issue? I don't know. I remember seeing a great experiment once where there were a group of, I think, 4 people, and 3 of them were acting, and 1 person was the actual test subject. And in there, they had either 2 strings or 2 straws, and the teacher would hold up both of them and say, which one is longer? And so the 3 actors would go first, and they picked the shorter straw. And they found that when that happened, that the test subject was far more likely to pick the shorter straw as being longer than if they were to go first, right? So it influences the way people think, because we don't necessarily, we've not set up defensive frameworks to tell ourselves, this is what I'm going to do. I'm always going to say the thing that I think is true. I'm always going to stand up for what I think is right. So setting that framework, and that framework of responsibility, and of course understanding your own moral and ethical standards, helps prepare you for those situations, to combat that bystander effect, to go out there and do something that you think is right, and that perpetuates that infinite game of making humanity better. Now, at the same time, you have to balance your decision fatigue, right? Your ability to make decisions and to interject yourself to do something hard with sort of your long-term infinite gain, right? If you burn yourself out on something, that's going to prevent you from doing good in the future. So you cannot save everyone all of the time. And that may cause us to feel bad, and that's, I think, okay. I think that's a human emotion to feel bad when you can't save something or someone. But we can't save everyone all the time. Ideally, if we're being as responsible as we can be, there is someone else to help pick up that slack. And unfortunately, I don't think we're there today, but I think it's something that's important for the future. So again, we start small and we work outward. Start with ourselves. How do we make the world a better place? Do we go out and fix other people's problems? No. And I don't remember if I talked about this last time, but I just finished reading The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein recently. And in that book, the lunar colony, which is a prison colony, declares freedom from Earth, sets up their own rules, and there's a small part in there where they set up a Congress, and they invite whoever wants to come in to start figuring out what rules and laws they need for this new place. And the interesting thing that they found is that people always wanted a law to regulate somebody else's problems. There was never a law that anyone instituted that affected themselves. It's always about fixing others, right? So the goal is not to go out and just fix other people all the time, right? The goal, I think, especially initially, is to fix ourselves to represent what we want to see in others, right? So back to that same idea. And that can be done with simple things. So whether it's fitness, right? We talked about fitness, being a good example in terms of taking care of ourselves and our nutrition and helping others, encouraging others, right? We tend to encourage others to do bad things. I bet you won't eat 5 cupcakes. I bet you won't drink 10 drinks, right? But rarely do we say, I bet you won't eat healthy for a week, right? Rarely is that ever a challenge dropped for our friends and our family. But simply by doing it ourselves, a lot of times we're going to catch flack for that, right? Because people seem to have this idea that being bad at something is acceptable, right? I remember in school, the people that did well in school were nerds. They were undesirable, right? And the people that goofed around and didn't accomplish their work, they were the people that everyone was attracted to, right? I think that's changed a little bit. I think we've started in the last couple of, maybe decade and a half or so to recapture a little bit of, that being smart is a good thing in certain demographics and in certain circles, right? So we hold up the tech genius as sort of the epitome of achievement, right? Because they have made a bunch of money, right? So it's really associated with money, maybe not necessarily intelligence. But I think there's more of an acceptance of people who are a little bit nerdy. Gaming is more of a common thing, right? So that's a culture shift that's happened over time. But rarely do we overtly say, no, it's okay to be smart. It's okay to dedicate your time to being a fit and better human. And I think the reason, of course, that most people have that sense of, well, I would much rather say nice things about the goofball, it's because it makes people feel better about themselves. Think about reality television. We watch, I think realistically, if we're gonna be honest with ourselves, we watch reality television to feel better about our lives, to watch the tragedy unfold and be like, well, at least that's not me. So whatever level I'm doing of being a not super successful human is at least not that bad. And I think that's a really unfortunate thing, and I think it's something we do have to challenge. You got to challenge those notions of it's okay to be okay. It's okay to strive. It's okay to fail. It's okay to be better. Right? I think those are the things that we need to say, but we often have a hard time saying and challenging those things. And that gets into our last topic for the day, which is of civil discourse. How do we have these conversations? Right? So last week we talked about conflict communication. How do we use the language to not put people on the defensive and help understand what they think about something by putting things in the framework of ourselves? Well, when I think about this is how I feel. Or it seems as though this is the case in this situation from my perspective. And even before that, we had talked about how to be a humble humanist, right? How do we articulate our views from our own perspective? And how do we ask the kinds of questions that allow people to explain what it is that they think and believe in a way that might allow them to really reflect on what it is, because they're able to have an open and non-threatening conversation. So those are a couple of ways we can go about it. Another way we can do this is through comedy, through humor. So much like science fiction, which allows us to see a world that's not real, but is very close to our world, we can look at subjects, topics, philosophies, societies, and see, well, how does that work? How would that work out? They're basically thought experiments. There's really long ones, and they're narratives, things that humans can understand. We can put ourselves in the story. We can empathize with the characters, and through our empathy, understand how it might feel to be in that situation. Comedy does something in a similar way. It allows us to hold something as an object of ridicule away from us, even if it's us, right? So when you hear comedians making fun of their own race or even other races, right? We might be a part of those, but we can look at it objectively. White people, black people, stereotypes, religious cultures, American culture. We can hold those things apart from us because it's an object of ridicule, of satire, and say, yep, that's true and it is funny. But then it also causes us to think about that thing and say, that is funny, but it's also true. I wonder if there's, maybe there's a different way to think about that. And so comedy is an incredibly powerful tool. And it's something that you'll notice that dictators or authoritarian regimes tend to look poorly on. So to me, that kind of helps to demonstrate its value. If people who want to control what others do think it's bad, then that good chance that it might actually be pretty good for those of us who like freedom and community and advancing humanity. So I want to share a couple other things. So comedy also helps us to laugh at what is painful, right? So there are many things in life that are incredibly painful to realize, right? That there are people, there are children out there who are abused and starving, and that we're polluting the future of our society, right? And humanity on this planet, right? Those are things that are overwhelming to consider. And comedy helps us. It helps us put it in a certain light or in a certain container to sandbox it in a way where we can say, all right, I'm going to look at little pieces of this, and I'm going to find the humor and the joy. And I think I talked about this before as well, that people who have been in prisoner of war camp found humor in their situation, and it helped them to survive. So one of the things I see comedy being good for is as a survival mechanism for us, an emotional pressure valve that lets us laugh about something that we can't necessarily deal with straight on. In Stranger in a Strange Land, also a Robert Heinlein book, one of my favorites actually, the character in there, Michael, doesn't understand humor for like the first 2/3 of the book almost. And they go to a zoo, and one monkey steals something from another monkey and like pushes it off a branch or something. And Michael, in this case, bursts out laughing, like hysterically uncontrollably, like he has gone insane. And after he's done with his laughing fit, he realizes, and he tells his companion, I understand humor now. It's to keep from crying. When we see things in the world that are so bad and so hurtful. And so I think comedy is extremely valuable to us. On one hand, to examine topics that are difficult or we can't maybe fully comprehend, but also as a release mechanism for us emotionally. So with that, I want to share the comedy story that happened to us on Friday. So there's a group of us, the humanists, some of whom are in the room today. And we went out to a comedy show, right? We're building community, not just here in the church, but actually going out, having fun with each other, talking, having some drinks, eating some food, and watching some local comics. And we are watching the show. We've been to one before, and they're pretty good. I would definitely recommend them. So what is it called? Comedy?
The Pork Grill, or?
The show.
Comedy Done Well.
Comedy Done Well. Yes, Comedy Done Well, Pork Grill, local plug. Really good, really good. I honestly was very impressed. Not saying that I expected them to be terrible, but for the area we're in, it was great to see that there's kind of that level of nightlife in comedy. So I would check them out if I were you. So we're into the host came up and she introduced kind of the evening and the event, and the first comedian gets up there and he's telling jokes, and he told a joke sort of about transgender bathroom issues and transgender identity being confusing. He didn't fully understand it, which if you look at it, maybe there's bits of it he doesn't understand, so he's making a joke about it to try and better understand what that means. How do people think about it, and what are the sensitivities around it, right? Comedians do that. They poke fun at things to examine them. And in doing so, he used language about quote unquote private parts. So he referred to private parts. This is a comedy show and it's an adult venue, right? So nothing totally uncommon happening so far. But apparently that was not the case for a lady named Sarah. Sarah was terribly offended by the discussion of private parts. So much so that she proceeded to have an argument at her table about the level of offense that I imagine they were willing to accept. They decided that they were, in fact, beyond their threshold of offense for the evening, and that they were going to leave. And so Sarah gets up and leaves in a huff. She marches angrily through the front door. There was a back door, by the way, that she could have easily exited out of and caused no ruckus. But Sarah wanted to make a point. So she goes out at the front door and just starts haranguing poor Tony up there, who's trying to tell jokes, and explains a number of things that she was mad about. She explained that the private parts that, we're up here having dinner and you're talking about private parts, and that was apparently unacceptable to her. So she leaves. Tony's a little bit surprised that that level of vitriol came from that joke. He didn't, I think, consider that to be that terribly offensive. But apparently it was, and it was so offensive, in fact, that she came back to the door, opened the door during his set, continued to harangue him, something about being a stewardess for 35 years. Not sure of the relevance of that, but I felt that she thought it was maybe important for him to know as a reference point. And so at that point, she then leaves, and you can kind of see her going back and forth and trying to figure out what level of angry she is. It's fairly high up there. And then, of course, her table, they make their way out in bits and pieces. I think some people were thinking about maybe staying, but for the sake of their friend, they felt the camaraderie was important enough that they should all leave. One of the guys, could have been her husband or something, who knows, left and very angrily offered Tony an additional testicle so that he would have two then, and then flipped him off and said, "Fuck you," and then left. Tony then made a great joke about how, if that were really true, the likelihood is that Tony's then a cancer survivor if he only has one testicle. And so that means that the guy was really being angry at him for being a cancer survivor, which I thought was particularly are hilarious. And so anyway, this all happened, and it took a few minutes total. And I have to say thank you to Sarah and her friends, to Team Sarah, because it really made the evening. It really did. It just made the evening. Not only did it make the evening, but it spurred this service and this conversation. So as an educational point, I really do have to thank them. That's an excellent teaching moment that I was thankful to be a part of. And it made me think about some things. Why were they so angry, right? Why were they so angry? Why did they take offense? As we talked about last time or the time before, you have to take offense. The phrase is to take offense. It's not to receive offense, right? You take offense. You decide if you will be offended. You might not like the words you say, or they might make you feel icky or bad because maybe you were raised a certain way and you were programmed that a certain language was publicly unacceptable. I can understand that. Those are all understandable things. Raging out of a restaurant and not tipping the waitress, by the way. Not sure if they thought it was her fault personally for scheduling the comedy or
Writing the jokes.
That maybe she wrote the jokes or maybe didn't screen the jokes appropriately. So the rest of the restaurant did actually take up a collection for that waitress, which was nice. Spurred by Molly, the comedian leading the team. But why was she so mad? And language does have meaning, right? Words do mean things, and we should be precise with our language. But when we put things in the context of comedy, we understand that there's some leeway to polite conversation because it's comedy. It's stretching the boundaries of what we would normally talk about in a regular conversation. And that words mean things, and a lot of times they have baggage, right? So words have baggage associated with them. Racial baggage, cultural baggage. But that doesn't mean that they automatically have power over us. It's just a word. People say curse words and sometimes they get offended. Remember my daughter, I don't remember what, she said, damn it, that's what she said. Something happened, she's 4, by the way. She was, oh, damn it. And I wasn't even mad, mostly because she used it correctly, in the correct context. I was impressed by that. That's cultural awareness right there. But they're just words. Why would I get mad at my daughter? I didn't tell her that these words are on the no list, nor would I, because they're just words, right? So why is it that we give these words this kind of power over us? And I think it really comes down to, back to the idea that you take offense. It's all on you. Somebody can say something stupid or ignorant, or even with the intent to be offensive, right? Again, I honestly think that most people do things out of ignorance or stupidity, not out of malice. But let's say they're even trying to be offensive. You get to choose whether to be offended or not. And so what does this have to do with responsibility? Let me bring it all back. If we're going to engage with each other, if we're going to be responsible, if we're going to set the example for others, we do have to engage in discourse, right? We're going to have to explain to people why we act the way we do, right? If you do it, that's great. You're setting the example. But people are going, why are you always this way, right? And they always kind of use it. It's like an accusation. Why are you always trying to eat healthy? Like, you seem in plenty good shape. Why do you eat healthy? Why do you work out? Well, because I can like to continue to be this way. Personally for me, I want to see my kids grow up and be old. I want to have grandkids. I have an objective in what I do. I have a purpose. Right? But we need to have that conversation. And so how do we do that? Sometimes we do it through comedy. Sometimes we do it by putting things in our framework. And I have to say that I love comedians, which my wife would be surprised at because I'm not a big fan of comedy. I actually like comedy. I was one of the jokesters. I made my friend pee his pants once on the swings after school. I have made someone shoot Jell-O and mashed potatoes, not at the same time, different occasions, out of their nose. They told me that it burns when it's not fluid. So I do love comedy, just not a comedy show. I'm not a going out kind of person. My wife makes me go. I'm glad she does. But I do love comedy. I love it for what it does for people. And I think it helps us to realize that we are aligned on, this is an estimate, like 95% of our objectives in any society and even between societies around the world. We have very little that we disagree on, and yet we focus on those disagreements. And so I think comedy provides one way that we can look at things together, and we can poke fun at it. There are people who do take it too far, and they hear somebody tell a joke, and then they tell a joke because it reinforces the stereotype that they already believe. That's a little bit different, right? But I think we can use comedy, and I think we can use those types of conversation to own the things that we see on a daily basis. You own it. You own the situations you're in. You are able to respond in some way, even if that way is just to be the good person in that situation. So for this week, what I'd ask is just reflect on what can you own? What situations in your life can you take ownership of? How can you help others from the individual stance of just setting the example, or even from engaging with someone and letting them know? So I know a couple of us went up afterward to Tony and the other comedians and said, you guys are doing great things. And I told them specifically a little bit of this, that I think comedy is important for us to have conversations because it's so hard for us to converse right now. And comedy is that one of those few remaining places where we know people can come together and laugh together and be together, even if they don't agree on, or even if they disagree on the little things that we tend to focus on. So think about that. Again, start small, set the example, support comedy, right? So whether it's the local folks who, again, I do recommend you support, but because ultimately life is too short not to have fun with it, right? When you look at our objectives for the church, right, it's to improve ourselves, improve our communities, and improve humanity. Part of improving humanity is not just guaranteeing its physical survival. It's about enjoying the human experience as well. So whenever I say advancing humanity, that's what I mean. That we're safe, secure, and can enjoy this experience. And not just us, everybody. Comedy is one of those ways. So with that, thank you very much. For those of you who aren't here today or are about to meet us later, we're about to go have lunch and expand our fellowship into eating, because food is love. We're going to be at Greek Corner, which is an excellent Greek restaurant locally. Loving some food diversity in this area, so that's good stuff. And do the same, right? Go out and have a meal with somebody. You know, take the time, schedule the time, and go out and engage. It's hard, I know. As an introvert, I want to sit at home and do nothing all the time. My wife makes me go out, and I do it because she says so, and I'm a smart man, but also because it's good for me, and I know it is. And while I have to push myself, use a little bit of my decision energy to get out of the house, once I do, I always enjoy myself, and I know that every time. So with that, go out, engage with folks, have a great week. Again, reflect on what you were grateful for in the week preceding, what you're looking forward to in the week to come, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.
I have a theory on why Sarah was so angry.
I would love to hear your theory.
Perhaps her first husband dumped her when he came out as transsexual.
That's entirely
It
possible.
may have hit way too close to home for her.
It could have. But so that was the interesting thing too, is, transgender jokes are a little bit edgy, right? Because on one side, some people aren't comfortable with even the idea of what it means to be transgender. And then on the other side, some people are very sensitive about making fun of a category of people who are already disenfranchised. So the joke itself, I think, was a little bit on the edgy side, but that's okay. We can examine controversial topics. But that wasn't even the part that she talked about being mad at. It was the discussion of private parts.
Well, maybe as a stewardess, she never saw anyone's private parts because they were all dressed on the airplane.
That could be. To me, it seems surprising that as a stewardess for 35 years, she never encountered any coarse
Mile High Club or
yeah, I don't know. So, but anyway, so that was a very interesting learning experience. Honestly, is what it was. It was a great learning experience. So
that's what happens when you try to have The comedy club in the buckle of the Bible belt. Unless it's a Bible joke, it's not funny.
But here's the thing is, that's why I really, and I wrote a post, so for those of you who are still watching, I wrote a post on our site, a note, I guess it is seems to be like a new Facebook function.
It's been there for a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of like a blog post, I just noticed it.
What it is.
So. But about how I really admire community, because they really embody a whole bunch of the services the lessons that we've talked about. When you're talking about failure and trying again and discipline, when you get up there and people don't laugh at what you are trying to make them laugh at, like you're just up there looking like an idiot with no escape whatsoever.
The door was right there.
And you have to just take it. And that is an incredible thing. Like that's a really vulnerable moment to stand up there and be like, well, screw that one up, on to the next one, hope I can regain my energy. So to me, I really admire comedians because they're up there and they're putting themselves out there and saying, I want to have a conversation with you and I want to make you laugh. And maybe some of it's helping me cope with something and maybe it's just what I want to do. But I'm going to try and I'm going to fail. And I'm going to try again and maybe I get some good ones. And I'm going to keep doing it until I get what I want. That's really admirable. So I really appreciate what they do and really hope they keep doing it because, you know, I know it can be hard. I mean, a lot of the performing arts, you know, they don't make a bunch of money unless you're the one person that makes it big. But there's such value in art, in comedy, in performance, because it allows us to look at the bits of being human that we don't normally want to look at. And that provides us value. To me, the people who work in the arts are some of the best teachers of humanity. That's why they call it the humanities, right? They're the best teachers of humanity because they take one piece of it and they really look at it hard and they make you see it a different way. And so that's why I do like supporting them. And I do like supporting particularly musicians because that's one that I hold dear to my heart because it's hard. It's a hard life. So thanks again to those folks, those comedians who are out there.
And Sarah.
And to Sarah, for our educational moment, for really making the world a better place. So
Sarah did not know what a comedian she was.
I'll tell you what.
But she got laughs.
Like that show could have been great by itself. There were plenty of good jokes in there, but that situation was a comedy goldmine for the entire evening. Like it really just made the night. It was incredible.
Raised the level of everything.
It was so like the whole night was just so good. And there was such camaraderie for everybody who was left at that point because we had just gone through an experience together. That was a community building moment right there. So it was absolutely incredible. And I just really, I'm glad that I was there. I appreciate that I was there. That's what I was definitely grateful for. As the one thing in the last week, I was grateful for being there in that moment and getting to experience that because that was just, wow. As well. I will always remember it. I will always remember this moment. So, all right, you hit the button.
Awesome.
Okay.
Welcome.